The first time my son-in-law called me a washed-up nobody in front of 300 people, he didn't know that the polished man he was bowing and scraping to had spent 20 years signing that man's bonus checks. I just stood there in a wool suit that smelled faintly of mothballs and let him talk. My name is Otis Brandt. I'm 71 years old. My knees sound like a gravel driveway when I stand up, and if you've ever been written off by somebody who only saw your shoes, stick with me. Because I want you to hear how this ends. For most of my life, I was nobody worth a second look, and that suited me fine. I grew up the son of a man who hauled scrap, and I started hauling it myself at 15 because my father's back gave out. I never finished high school. What I had instead was a willingness to show up before the sun and stay after it's set, and a stubborn idea that if a thing was built right, it didn't need to be built twice. I started with one flatbed truck and a yard full of second-hand steel out past the rail spur in a town nobody famous has ever come from. People bought from me because I didn't cheat them. That's the whole secret, if you want it. I priced fair, I delivered when I said I would, and when I was wrong, I ate the cost and apologized to a man's face. That one truck became 4. 4 became a fleet, the scrapyard became a supply company, and the supply company became a manufacturer, and somewhere in the middle of all that, without me ever quite noticing the day it happened, I had built a thing called Meridian Industrial that fabricated and shipped components to half the plants in the Midwest, and then half the plants in the country. We crossed $1 billion in revenue the same spring my wife Cora was diagnosed. I remember the board congratulating me in the morning, and sitting in a hospital parking lot that night with my forehead against the steering wheel, doing math that had nothing to do with money. Cora was the one who taught me that a man's name is the only thing he gets to keep. She used to say it plain, no poetry to it, when I'd come home steaming about somebody who'd lied to my face in a meeting. Let them keep the deal, Otis, she'd say. You keep the name. She believed character was a muscle, that you built it the same way you built anything, a little every day, and that if you didn't use it, you'd lose it. We had one daughter, late and prayed for, and her name is Delia. Cora raised that girl to be kind and tough in equal measure, and for a long time I believed it took. When Cora died, I did something my lawyers thought I'd lost my mind over. I stepped back. I sold down to a minority position, kept enough to matter and not enough to run anything, and I handed the day-to-day to a young executive I'd been grooming for years, a sharp, careful man named Gus Wexler. Gus had come up under me from the loading dock. I'd watched him refuse a kickback once when he thought nobody was looking, and that was the day I marked him as the one. When I made him president, I gave him and 4 others a ring. Heavy, plain, the kind of thing you'd never notice unless you knew. I told them it didn't mean we'd made money. It meant we'd made it honest. Gus still wears his, so do I. Then I disappeared. Not dramatically. I just stopped going. I moved out to the cabin Cora and I had built with our own hands by a cold lake an hour from anything, and I let the world forget the name behind the company. I let my beard grow in gray. I dropped weight I'd been carrying for 30 years. I drove a rusted Ford because it ran and I liked it. And I fished. And I fixed things for the neighbors. And I let people decide I was a broke old handyman who'd never amounted to much. I'll be honest with you, there was a relief in it I hadn't expected. When nobody thinks you worth flattering, you find out fast who actually likes you. Delia married a man named Brock Vandermeer. I had reservations from the first dinner, and I kept most of them to myself, because Cora taught me you can't argue a grown woman out of love. You can only wait for the love to argue with itself. Brock was handsome in the way that costs money to maintain. He had a laugh. He could turn on like a faucet, a watch too big for his wrist, and an opinion about everything he'd never actually done. He worked, of all the places on earth, at Meridian. A regional sales director 2 divisions down, hired 3 years before any of this and promoted twice on charm. He had no idea who I was. To him, I was just Delia's strange old man who lived in the woods and couldn't hold down a job. I let him think it. I told myself I was being patient. Looking back, I was being a coward, and I'll own that. I should have shown my hand sooner, but I wanted Delia to see him clearly with her own 2 eyes, not through anything I handed her. The invitation came by way of my daughter, and it came reluctant. Brock was about to be named president of the Eastern Division, a real promotion, a big one, the kind that came with a glass office and a number with a comma in it. The company was throwing a leadership gala downtown to announce it. Black tie, the whole circus, and the chief executive himself was flying in. Delia called me from her car, and I could hear her choosing her words the way you'd choose your steps across a frozen pond. "Dad, there's a dinner," she said. "Brock's getting promoted. It would mean a lot if you came." A pause. It's a fancy thing. Corporate people. You don't have to talk to anybody. I knew what she was telling me. She was telling me not to embarrass her. She didn't say it. But a father hears the thing under the thing. And here's what I'd like you to understand, because it's the part that still sits heavy. It didn't make me angry. It made me sad in a way I didn't have a word for. This was the little girl I used to carry on my shoulders through the lumberyard, the one who told everyone her daddy could lift the whole world. Now she was warning me to be small so I wouldn't cost her anything. "I'll come," I said. "I've got a suit." I did have a suit. It was a charcoal wool I'd bought in 1994 for Cora's brother's funeral, and it still fit because I'd shrunk back into it. I had it pressed at the dry cleaner in town, and the woman behind the counter said it was a fine old suit. They didn't make them like that anymore. And I thanked her and didn't tell her I owned 11 of its descendants in a closet I never opened anymore. The hotel was the kind of place with a doorman and a chandelier, the size of my truck. The ballroom glittered. There were ice sculptures and a jazz trio and waiters moving like they were on rails, and 300 people in clothes that cost more than my first house, all of them laughing a little too loud at things that weren't funny. I came in through the wrong door, and a young man in a headset asked if I was lost. I said no. My daughter was here. And he looked at my suit and my hands, and I have working hands, scarred and knuckled and brown, and he didn't believe me until I gave him Delia's name. I found her near the front, glowing. She was beautiful, my girl, in a deep green dress, and for 1 second she looked at me and I saw the kid again, the one who used to run down the gravel to meet my truck. Then I watched her eyes flick around the room, checking who'd seen me, gauging the damage. She crossed to me fast and put a hand on my arm and lowered her voice. "You made it," she said. "There's a seat for you over by the back. The dinner's about to start. Brock's at the head table with the CEO and the board." She smoothed my lapel, a small fussing gesture, and what she was really doing was inspecting me. "You look nice, Dad." "You look like your mother," I said, and her face did something complicated. And then somebody called her name and she was gone. I want to be fair to my daughter, even now. She wasn't cruel. She was scared. She'd spent 3 years building a life on the idea that Brock was going somewhere, and tonight was the proof, and her father in his mothball suit was a thread she was afraid would pull the whole thing apart. People do small, ugly things when they're afraid of losing something they're not sure they deserve. I knew that. It didn't make the back of my throat hurt any less. The head table was up on a little riser, lit warm. And there, 3 seats from where Brock would sit, was Gus Wexler, older than the last time I'd seen him, grayer at the temple, but the same straight back, the same careful way of holding his fork, like he was deciding whether the meeting was over. I hadn't seen him in 5 years. We'd kept it clean, a phone call here and there, papers by courier, my name nowhere near the letterhead. He didn't see me come in. I took my seat at the back, beside an empty chair and a woman who told me she did the catering accounts, and seemed relieved to have somebody to talk to who wasn't trying to sell her anything. The dinner ran its course. Speeches. A slideshow. Somebody read sales figures off a card, and then, when the plates were cleared and the wine was flowing, Brock stood up at the head table, tapped his glass, and got the room. He was loose by then, 2 or 3 deep, his collar open, that faucet laugh running. "Before I say my thank yous," he said, "I want to do something. I want you all to meet a special guest." He found me with his eyes and grinned, and I felt the floor tilt a little, the way it does when you know what's coming and can't stop it. "Come on up here, Otis. Don't be shy." I could have stayed seated. I think about that. I could have raised a hand and waved it off. But Dilly was looking at me with a fixed, pleading smile, and I didn't want to make it worse for her, so I got up. My knees announced themselves. I walked the length of that ballroom slow, 300 faces turning to watch the old man in the gray suit shuffle toward the light. And Brock came down off the riser to meet me and threw a heavy arm around my shoulders like a yoke. He smelled like cologne and bourbon. This, he announced, turning me toward the head table, toward the CEO, is my father-in-law. Otis, he squeezed. Now, Otis here is, how do I put this kindly, Otis is between opportunities. Has been for, a couple decades. Laughter, the nervous kind. Lives in a shack out in the sticks. Drives a truck that sounds like a wood chipper. We try to help him out, throw a little work his way when something needs fixing, but the man's allergic to a steady paycheck. We invited him tonight out of the goodness of our hearts. He looked right at Gus Wexler, hungry for approval. Family, right? You can't fire him. He laughed at his own joke. A few people laughed with him. And I stood there, his arm crushing my shoulder, and I looked across the table at the man I had pulled off a loading dock 30 years ago. And I watched Gus Wexler go absolutely still. He'd set his fork down. He was staring at me, and I watched his eyes do the thing travel from my face down to my right hand, where I'd worn the same heavy plain ring for 30 years, the twin of the one on his own finger. I watched him stop breathing for a second. I watched the color drain out of him. Reggie's harmless, Brock was still going, riding the laugh. Don't worry, he won't ask you for a job, Otis, Gus said. The whole table heard it. The way he said my name, low, careful, with a tremor under it, cut through Brock's voice like a wire. Brock stopped, confused. Mr. Wexler, I said. It was the first thing I'd said since I stood up. It's been a while. Gus rose. His chair scraped the floor and the sound carried. He was a tall man, and he came up to his full height. And he did not look at Brock, did not look at my daughter, did not look at the 300 people now leaning in. He looked at me, and his face was the face of a man who has just realized he let a wolf into the room and called it a guest. Sir, he said. That word landed in the silence like a stone in a pond. Sir. Brock's arm slid off my shoulder. He looked from Gus to me, the grin starting to curdle. Mr. Sterling, Gus said. Except he said Brock's name. Vandermeer, and his voice had gone to ice. Mr. Vandermeer. And his voice had gone to ice. Mr. Vandermeer. Did I just hear you call this man between opportunities? Brock laughed, but it came out thin. Yeah, it's a joke, sir. He's family. This man, Gus said, and now he raised his voice so it reached the back of the room, is the reason you have a job, or rather, and here something almost like grim satisfaction crossed his face, the reason you had one. He turned to the table. Ladies and gentlemen, allow me to correct the introduction. The gentleman in the gray suit is Otis Brandt. He founded this company. He built it with his own 2 hands. He is, to this day, the largest individual shareholder of Meridian Industrial, and the man who trained me and every other person at this table worth a damn. The room did not so much go quiet as get the air sucked out of it. I heard a glass set down somewhere. I heard a woman whisper a word I won't repeat. And I watched my son-in-law's face come apart in stages. The grin first, then a certainty under it, then whatever it was holding the whole performance up. That's Brock started. That's not, Mr. Vandermeer, Gus said. You're terminated. Effective immediately. You could have heard a pin drop on carpet. You can't. Brock's voice cracked up an octave. This is my night. The promotion. The CEO is announcing, there is no promotion, Gus said. There was going to be. There is not now. He looked at Brock with the flat, clinical distaste of a man examining something he's found on the bottom of his shoe. I will not stand here and watch a director of this company publicly humiliate its founder for sport and then ask me to sign his bonus. You're done, and if you ever speak to this man with that mouth again, I'll make sure you don't sell so much as a used filing cabinet anywhere in this industry. I want to tell you I felt triumphant. I didn't. Not yet. I felt the way you feel when you finally lance a thing that's been swollen for months. Relief and a little sickness at the smell of it. I kept my face still. I didn't want it over too fast. There's a difference between justice and a quick death. And I had waited a long time for my daughter to see this man without his costume on, and I wasn't going to rob her of the full view. Brock turned to me. The charm was gone, peeled clean off, and what was underneath was ugly and panicked and mean. You, he said, you did this. You set me up. You came here to ruin me. You introduced me, I said quietly. I just stood here. That was when the night really started coming apart, and I'll tell you, it came apart in a way I couldn't have scripted. Brock, trying to claw back some scrap of control in front of the people who just watched him drown, did the worst possible thing. He decided to be generous. He spun toward the room with his arms out, and a desperate, wild brightness in his eyes. You know what? He announced. Forget it. Forget him. This is still a party. Drinks are on me. The whole room, open bar, top shelf, charge it all to my tab. Let's show these people what a real night looks like. He flagged down the banquet manager, a trim man in a dark suit who'd been hovering at the edge with the held-breath look of a professional watching a disaster reach his department. Brock pulled out a metal card holder, the kind that's supposed to make you look important, and slapped a black card on the manager's tray. Run it, he said. All of it. The bar, the room, the works. And put the gratuity at 25%. The manager took the card. He had one of those hand-held machines, and he ran it right there, because Brock wanted the room to watch. The machine thought about it. Then it made a sound. Flat, short, ugly. The manager looked at the screen, then at Brock, with the perfect neutral face of a man who has delivered bad news in elegant rooms before. I'm sorry, sir, he said. It's been declined. Run it again. Brock's jaw was tight. He ran it again. The same flat beep. Declined. Sir? That's a platinum card. There's no limit on it. Brock's voice was climbing. He snatched the card holder back and pulled another card, threw it down. Use this one. Beep. Declined. A third. Beep. Declined. A third. Beep. Declined. The manager set the machine down with great gentleness, the way you set down something around a person who's becoming unpredictable. Sir, he said, low, the cards are showing as frozen. Do you have another form of payment? And here's a thing you might not know, but I'll tell you because it matters. Those weren't all his cards. One of them was a corporate card, and one of them was tied to a line of credit Brock had been drawing against for 2 years, an advance on future earnings he'd been granted on the strength of a promotion that, as of about 90 seconds prior, no longer existed. The corporate card died the instant Gus said he was terminated. The line of credit. Well, I'll get to that. Brock went white. He looked at the room, 300 people watching him drown for the second time in 5 minutes, and he did the math no narcissist can ever do, which is the math that ends in him being at fault. He couldn't get there, so he looked for somebody else to hand the check to. He turned to my daughter. Delia, your card. Give me your card. And Delia, in her green dress, her face gone to chalk, shook her head. Brock, I left my bag in the room. You told me to leave it upstairs. You said it ruined the line of the dress. She stopped, because she hurt herself. Because she was apologizing for not being able to bail him out of a hole he dug with his own mouth. He looked around. His friends, the ones who'd laughed at his jokes, were studying the tablecloth. His parents weren't there. He was alone in a room full of people, with a tab he couldn't cover and a career that had ended between the salad and the speeches. And then he found me. He came across the floor at me with his hand out, and his voice dropped to a hiss only the closest tables could hear, though God knows everyone could read it. You pay it. This is your fault, so you fix it. You're the father of the bride. The father. Whatever. It's tradition. The family pays. So pay. He jabbed a finger at my suit, my hands. I know you've got money squirreled away somewhere. Every old hick like you has a coffee can buried in the yard. Dig it up. Write a check. But you are not walking out of this room until you clean up the mess you made." He grabbed my lapel, the same lapel my daughter had smoothed an hour earlier. I looked at him a long moment. Then I reached, slow, into the inside pocket of my old wool jacket. I watched the whole room lean in. I watched Brock's eyes lock onto my hand, the greed and the relief flooding in, certain that the old man was about to pull out a checkbook and rescue him the way old men always rescued him. I watched my daughter's shoulders drop an inch. Watched the breath go out of her because she believed it too. She believed her father would pay, because her father had always paid. And under the relief on her face, I saw the thing that nearly broke me. I saw that she expected it. She wasn't grateful. She was waiting. I took out an envelope, cream-colored, soft at the corners from writing in my pocket all evening. I held it out. Brock tore it from my hand. He didn't say thank you. He ripped the flap, his fingers shaking, hunting for the check, the cash, the salvation. He turned it over. He shook it. Something fell out and hit the carpet with a soft, dull sound, and it wasn't paper. It was a work glove. Old leather, brown, the right hand, worn pale at the fingertips and shaped permanently to a hand that wasn't his. One of mine. There was a card tucked behind it, and on the card, in my own writing, in pen, I'd written that morning at my kitchen table with my coffee going cold. "Respect is earned with these. You've never once put them on." Brock stared at it. He looked at the glove on the floor like it was an insult sent from another planet. "What is this?" he said. "What is this?" His voice was rising again, raw now. "I need 30 grand and a job, and you give me a glove. Is this a joke to you?" "It's not a joke," I said, and I made sure my voice carried. "It's the only thing I have that you've never wanted. You called yourself a self-made man. You're standing in a company I made, married to a daughter I raised, in a suit you can't pay for. A loser can't carry a winner, son. You're on your own." That's when Delia ran forward and grabbed my arm, both hands, her nails through the wool. "Dad, Dad, please. They're going to call the police. He'll be arrested. Just pay it. I know you have something. I know you have Mom's insurance money. Just give it to him. Do it for me." And there it was, out loud, in front of everyone. I turned to my daughter. I looked at the woman my wife and I had raised to be strong and kind. And I want to tell you I saw a stranger, but that's not quite true. I saw my daughter. And I saw exactly how far she'd let herself be carried away from the things her mother put in her. And the two of those at once is a particular kind of pain I hope you never feel. "I have paid enough, Delia," I said. "You haven't paid anything," she said, and she was crying now. "You gave him a glove, haven't I?" I laughed, and it came out worse than I meant it to. "Let me refresh your memory, sweetheart. That Audi of yours, the one Brock surprised you with. Who do you think made the payments the 4 months he forgot last year? The bank wasn't being generous. That was me. The down payment on the condo downtown. The one you two tell everyone you bought. The one Brock calls his real estate instinct." My voice climbed now, on purpose, so the whispering tables could hear every word. "That was a wire from my account. The advance the company gave him against his promotion. The line of credit that just died on that machine. Personally guaranteed by a silent partner." "That's me, Delia. I'm the silent partner. I've been quietly holding up the floor under your whole life for 3 years, and the man you married has been standing on that floor telling a ballroom I'm a charity case." She let go of my arm. She put her hand over her mouth, and behind her, Brock made a sound I won't try to spell, a strangled animal noise, because he was finally doing the math. And the math had only one name in it, and it was his. Security came then. Gus had signaled them somewhere in all of it. 2 of them took Brock by the arms, and he didn't go quietly. He thrashed, and he swore, and he kicked over a chair, and as they walked him out, he was still shouting, "It was my fault, my bad luck, my curse. that I'd poisoned everything, that Delia had let me in. The doors swung shut on the sound of him. The jazz trio, God love them, had stopped playing somewhere back near the firing, and never started again. I bent down, slow, my knees complaining, and I picked my glove up off the carpet, and I put it back in my pocket. Then I straightened my tie, the same knot I taught Gus Wexler to tie 30 years before, and I walked out of that ballroom and didn't look back. And I left 300 people to talk about it for the rest of their lives. I'd like to tell you the rest was clean. It wasn't. The worst things in a family never are. The fallout came fast, and it came ugly, but not the way the room probably imagined. Brock wasn't dragged off to some asylum. Real life is duller and harder than that. What happened was that the termination triggered a review, the way these things do, and the review turned over a rock, and under the rock was 2 years of padded expense reports, phantom client dinners, a consulting fee, routed to a shell company with his cousin's name on it, and sales numbers that turned out to be smoke. He hadn't been the star of anything. He'd been a leak in the hull dressed up as a fountain. The company clawed back what it could. The line of credit got called, the condo, the lease, the watch. It all came down in about 90 days, the way a thing built on borrowed posture always does, once the borrowing stops. He never once said he was sorry. Not to me, not to Delia. He blamed me to anyone who'd still take his calls. He told people I'd schemed to destroy him out of jealousy, that I was a bitter old man who couldn't stand his success. His success, the man whose every nice thing I had paid for. A narcissist can't look in a mirror, because the mirror keeps showing him the one face he can't survive seeing. So he kept the story where he was the victim, and he told it to anybody until there was nobody left to tell. People asked me later why I did it the way I did. Why I sat on it for 3 years. Why I didn't just have my lawyers handle Brock quietly, expose the fraud in a boardroom, spare everybody the scene. I've thought about it a lot, out on the lake. And here's the truest answer I've got. I didn't want to win an argument. I wanted my daughter to wake up. If I'd handed her a folder full of evidence, she'd have found a way to defend him, because by then, defending him was the same as defending her own choices, and people will burn the whole house down before they'll admit they bought the wrong house. I could have told her 100 times he was hollow, and she'd have heard a jealous old man. She had to see it. She had to stand in a green dress, in a room full of people, and watch the man she'd married try to make her father pay his bar tab, and then beg her to drain her dead mother's insurance to save him. I couldn't tell her the truth. I had to build a room where the truth could stand up on its own and walk over and introduce itself. It cost me. Don't think it didn't. There were nights I sat in that cabin and wondered if I'd just lost my only child to teach her a lesson she might hate me for. She came out to the lake about a month after. I heard the gravel first. I always hear the gravel. And I came out on the porch, and there she was, getting out of a car that wasn't the Audi anymore, in jeans and an old sweatshirt, no makeup, looking 10 years older, and somehow more like herself than she had in a long time. She stood at the bottom of the steps, and she couldn't get the first sentence out, and I just waited. Because I've learned you can't rush a person across that kind of ice. I left him, she finally said. I nodded. Dad, her face went. I didn't say anything. He stood there and called you, and I stood there and let him. On my wedding day, too. I never told you that. The wedding, he said something about you to his groomsmen, and I heard it, and I laughed. I laughed. Dad. She was crying hard now, the ugly honest kind. I knew who you were to me, and I let him make you small so I could feel big. What kind of person does that to her own father? I came down the steps, my knees the whole symphony. And I'll tell you what I did, because Cora would have wanted me to. I didn't make her grovel. I didn't recite the list of everything I'd paid for. A man who keeps score isn't forgiving. He's collecting. And I wasn't interested in collecting for my own kid. A scared one, I said. You did a scared thing. That's not the same as being a bad person, Delia. But you're going to have to decide which one you're going to be from here. Because the scared kind ends up alone, and I don't want that for you. She put her face against my shoulder, against the mothball wool, and she cried like she hadn't since she was small. And I held my daughter on the porch her mother and I had built. And over her head I looked out at the lake, going gold in the evening. And I thought, Cora, I hope I got it right. I hope I didn't break her teaching her to stand. She moved back closer to home. She got work, real work, with her hands and her head, a design outfit that didn't care about Brock's last name. She started coming out on Sundays, and then, more than Sundays, about a year on, she had a little girl of her own, and she named her after her mother. And I've got a granddaughter now who calls me Pop, and thinks my truck is the best vehicle ever made by man. And on that point, she and I are in complete agreement. I went back to the company too, a little, not to run it. Gus runs it, and runs it well, and we both know better than to change that. But I sit in on the board now. I take the ring out of the drawer and put it on, and I drive into the city in the rusted Ford, and the valets don't know what to make of me. And I like it that way. The young people there call me Mr. Brandt, and they're nervous. And I tell them the same thing I told Gus on a loading dock 30 years ago. Price it fair. Deliver when you say you will. When you're wrong, eat the cost and apologize to the man's face. That's it. That's the whole secret. There isn't a more complicated one. No matter how expensive the suit is, that's telling you otherwise. I think about Brock once in a while, not with hate. Hate's too much work at my age. I think about him the way you'd think about a man who stood in a field full of seed and chose to eat the seed instead of plant it, and then cursed the dirt when nothing grew. He believed money was the same thing as worth. He thought if he had enough zeros, the people around him would have to respect him. He found out too late that respect doesn't run on a card, and that the bill always comes, and that the only currency that clears at the end is your name. Mine's still good. I kept it clean like she told me to. The truck still runs, and most evenings I sit out on that porch with my granddaughter falling asleep against me, and I think about a ballroom and a glove on the carpet. And I am, at 71, exactly as rich as a man needs to be.